STEM identity with students early on. And the way I came to be involved with STEM at our school was my colleague here, Kevin Simmons, came on board a year after I did. And this was a school that was K through 8, so you can imagine that my experience was working with the elementary students. Having been in a high school prior to this particular school was an interesting experience in and of itself. But all of a sudden, the students in my middle school classroom were talking about cube satellites and aerospace, and I had no idea not only what a cube satellite was, but how in the world middle school students were not only building them, but actually learning real-world aerospace in that middle school setting. Before long, these same students were being asked, of course, to go speak and give updates at our city hall, eventually the state of Tallahassee with our legislative updates, and eventually even DC, where we would advocate on behalf of space policy. And we even spoke at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where our goals with aerospace in general and using CubeSats as like a disruptive learning tool became also about the quality of STEM education in our country. And so we really believe that we kind of have to change the paradigm of what we call STEM education. So that's kind of how I got involved in that. The Aerospace and Innovation Academy kind of built from the idea that while our students were actually learning the real content of aerospace, they also had to learn how to communicate it effectively. So we kind of created what we affectionately refer to as the talkies and the techies. The idea that the ideal engineer of the future would be a person who's not only very competent with that content, but can articulate that with a variety of different people. And so from there, the Aerospace and Innovation Academy was born as a way of kind of like an after-school program, really. So to be on the four walls of the one classroom where we had been, to allow students from around our community, and now that we've kind of shifted even online due to COVID, to students around the country. In fact, we started working with some students here in Hawaii as well. And so what it seeks to do is provide unique and distinctive STEM opportunities, primarily for middle and high school students. However, our students work with younger students, and it was our experience at working at that K through 8 school where we realized the really, really young kids are the ones who are so excited about learning. And that's why we want to share with you today why it's so important that we help young students as early as kindergarten to develop a science identity. And so let's talk a little bit about the STEM pipeline, right? We hear that term kind of thrown about a lot in the United States, and it is a real problem that we're starting to see. The idea, of course, the pipeline could start off at the end, they get excited, these are, they're excited about STEM overall, but something happens in this pipeline. Instead of coming out at the other end where they're going to be in that career field, we're losing people along the way. And this comes at an incredibly important time when people are retiring. We call it the graying of the workforce, because these particular engineers have traditionally been white men. And so something is happening along that pipeline to where we're not getting enough. In fact, we're going to have several opportunities in this career field in the future, and we aren't going to have enough people to fill them. So how can we as educators, particularly of younger students, help them to identify early on to see the possibilities that exist for them? We're going to look at this from a few different angles, primarily with the idea of Erik Erikson's theories of competency, a lot of educational theorists, we learn about that along the way. The idea that kids kind of form their identity at different times in their lives. We'll also look through the lens of a social cognitive career theory, the idea that we can be who we imagine ourselves as. And ultimately as well, you heard a lot about grit and growth mindset. That's really a focus of the idea of experiential learning that David Cobb mentions, and project-based learning, which we'll share with you about today. But ultimately, Blue Sky Learning philosophy embraces that grit and growth mindset model as well. My colleague Kevin Simmons kind of coined this term. It was a business model, the idea that you can have these ridiculous, lofty goals. The beauty of working with kids with ridiculous, lofty goals like building CubeSats is that they don't know they shouldn't be able to do it. And that's where I think we as adults, oftentimes, we kind of undervalue what children can bring to the table. When they don't know that they can't accomplish something, there is no more sky is the limit. They become that which they believe that they are. So let's talk a little bit about science kids. And I always love referring to this picture here where you see these little kindergartners in lab coats, right? On this particular day, we had been doing a school-wide science fair. Science fair usually starts in about the middle school, but this year our kindergarten teachers, fantastic, and was also of that grit and growth mindset, collaborated a lot with us, and that kind of reinforces what Jennifer was saying. They too did experiments in their class. They not only did the experiments, but they shared out their findings. So they're learning the scientific method as early as kindergarten. And then they were able to not only don those lab coats where for that day, if nothing else, if they never experienced something like that again, they believed that being a scientist was possible for them, right? And so that really is behind what that idea of helping to form a science identity is. Obviously the home is really the first school, right? In an ideal world, all of our students would have both parents there, educated, enough money to be able to provide a text-rich environment and educational tools that would take that natural creativity that's there and really help these children to be able to see all the possibilities are there. I mean, when a child looks in the mirror, at first they can kind of identify based on that reflection. But then after that, parents are the natural extension of their identity. So if dad is a doctor and mom is a scientist, well, that's something possible for me. But of course, all homes are not equal playing fields. And that's where we as teachers can really come in to kind of fill in that identity gap for those students who may not be able to see those experiences within their homes. This is particularly important for the underrepresented populations, like women, people of color, imagine women of color. But we would also offer that students of lower socioeconomic status as well. Because again, if they don't have that idea that, well, my parents went to college, so therefore, I have to do the same thing, we as teachers can help to provide those role models for them that will help them get there. And that's one of the problems I think with STEM curriculum and how we approach that today, is that oftentimes we throw that word about. It's a way to get funding and everybody's required to kind of, throw it into their curriculums in some way. But oftentimes we see it as, oh, here's a coding class, or here's a laptop, now we're doing STEM. It's not real world engagement at all. So we have to have a paradigm shift about what we consider STEM education, and it has to be experiential in nature. There has to be a connection between industry, and in our case, what we love to deal with is aerospace, but industry and academia, to be able to pull our communities into our classroom, to provide the role models for our students, particularly the demographic students in our classrooms. If they aren't going to see people who look like them in a particular field, then they are unlikely to identify the possibilities that they could have otherwise. Now, I know that we've all seen these charts before, and they are old, but they haven't really changed much, to be honest. We start with women in general and going into the idea of that STEM pipeline. And while there have been some catching up, there's still a lot of catching up to do, primarily in, of course, the wage gap that exists. But it's not just about the wage gap that exists for women who go into these STEM fields. It's also about retaining them. So you may have women who go into these STEM fields, but they don't always finish. Something happens along the way to where they change career fields. Or when they do, oftentimes it's in the biological sciences versus, say, the harder sciences. And by that I mean just like the content area of math. So what is happening? And what the findings will say in social career cognitive theory is that it's because oftentimes women go into these engineering fields and there just simply aren't women there as role models. There are fewer women teaching those classes. There are fewer women heading up the organizations that you can join professionally there. And over a period of time, don't see people who look like me, I can't be in this field. Whereas grit and growth mindset can certainly help kind of turn that about. If they don't have that experience there, they have a tendency to kind of fall out of that pipeline. But of course, we've all seen this chart, and again, the grading of the pipeline is based mostly on white men in engineering fields. As you can see, that's still the case, and while women have a little bit bigger piece of the pie, when it really comes down to those underrepresented populations, you can note that people of color, particularly Hispanics and Blacks, are the least represented in these fields. And I would bet that indigenous cultures as well are not represented very well in this field. But again, this is the field that's going to be offering the jobs of the future. They're going to be offering not just jobs, but good paying ones at that. And so we must do more in order to be able to kind of help reinforce this identity for those students who might not have that option otherwise. Because again, there are fewer role models. I mentioned socioeconomics, and this is where that impact ultimately can come into play if we can help students really see some opportunities that might be there for them. We know that these are going to be increasing percentage-wise as far as what is a good paying job. And when you have a job like this that's all of a sudden at your disposal, it's all of a sudden something you're capable of doing, it can really change the ideas of what we see as self-fulfilling prophecies in entire families and stop generational poverty as well. And so it's really important that we help guide these underrepresented populations into these areas. And because we recognize that this STEM pipeline is so important, and it's not to say that English isn't important, again, I was an English teacher, but it's to recognize that within industries, we have the capability of taking all of what our passions are and finding a place within them. And so Deanie here is going to share with you a little bit about the importance of those 21st century skill sets in order to kind of bring about those experiences for your students.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. The 21st century skills are a set of skills that are necessary for students and workers in the future. They were developed by the National Education Association in 2002 as a response to the decline in student performance in STEM subjects. Of them, the most important are the 4 C's, which are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. These skills are necessary in teaching younger students as they will need them in the future. One way we can teach younger students the 21st century skills and change our curriculum is through project-based learning. Project-based learning is a teaching method that helps students understand concepts and want to learn more about those concepts by teaching them through hands-on work. This is very useful as it engages them and teaches them how to problem solve, not theoretically, but in the real world, and really engages their interests and make them want to learn more about the subject. An example of project-based learning is CubeSats in education. CubeSats are small 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter satellites that carry out an experiment in space. Experiments range from lenses that look down on the Earth to gather data to live bacterial payloads inside of the CubeSat. Although CubeSats may seem like a university-level project, our middle school science team has been involved in CubeSats for a number of years, and we've even successfully managed to launch a CubeSat in space. What is important here is we engage students earlier rather than later to really develop their interest for STEM subjects. But CubeSats are not the only way to engage students in STEM. There are many other ways, such as community-based STEM activities, such as Parts or STEM Fest, in which older students mentor younger students through fun science experiments and activities to really share their love and enthusiasm for STEM with them. Another successful example of how to engage younger students was the science blues at our school, in which younger students were encouraged to do science experiments and then present them to their peers, teachers, parents, and judges as if it was a real science affair. This was a huge success, as having the students put on the lab coats and do the experiments really made them feel as if they were scientists. Furthermore, teams of our students have worked together to author coloring books, activity books, and picture books for younger kids. They've also organized school-wide launch parties at the launch of our YSAT-1 satellite, which had many fun activities such as Lego design competitions and stall proms. All of these to engage students from elementary to middle school. These events have been huge successes as many students have become interested. For example, our CubeSat team, which used to be called the Wolverine CubeSat team, consisted of a few 7th and 8th graders. Now, the Wolfpack CubeSat development team has students as young as the 3rd grade and as old as the 12th grade, all encouraged and engaged in STEM and actively participating in our activities. Our organization also encourages our students to participate in science fair and educational and scientific conferences, both international and domestic, such as this ICE conference. Our students have also participated in essay and design competitions. We have been met with huge success, and students have become
for long enough to know that, as she was mentioning earlier, it really is about, you can have that bad apple in that bunch that can kind of really break the atmosphere of collaboration. But when teachers come together, as Kevin would say, like-minded zealots, you know, for a particular cause, a lot can be done, even ridiculous, lofty goals, like I mentioned. We were fortunate to be able to receive a grant from the Florida Space Grant Consortium in order to work with particular Title I teachers in our area, to try to maybe have them embrace that idea that you're not just stuck teaching that same, you know, content that the district tells you you have to do. There are ways that you can still get excited about your content area with your students. And so we were able to bring these teachers, give them a stipend to come to the one-week camp. They were also able to bring several of their Title I students to attend the aerospace camp that was going on concurrently, which was important because many of these students didn't even know what aerospace was, let alone to know that there were a vast amount of opportunities that they could eventually undertake. Some of the things that we told those teachers who came to that camp was the importance of working with our professional organizations. And there's obviously a professional organization for whatever content you're in, National Councils of Teachers of English, Science, Math, etc. But there are some that you might not even think about that you should consider, and you should certainly look around your community to find. Some of which that we embrace is the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, or the AIAA, for which not only are teachers allowed to have free membership, you don't have to be a science teacher, by the way, to take part in this, but you're provided with networking opportunities. And this goes back to that idea of being able to find people who look like your students. Have these engineers come back to the classroom, talk with your kids, and actually do some experiments with them. That's been really beneficial. Plus, they also have lesson plans. So you don't have to overthink how you're going to bring it into your classroom. They'll do it for you, and there are different levels for that. Your students can also join for free, so it's a great resource. Additionally, we always recommend the Space Foundation Teacher Liaison Program. And this is an international program where if you are accepted, and it's free to apply, but if you are accepted, you get the opportunity to work with teachers around the world. We've been able to collaborate most recently with teachers in India as they were investigating what they need to change about their own STEM situation there. And ultimately, they provide lesson plans as well, particularly for those younger grade levels. So you can find all kinds of cool rocket things. They did a liaison, I guess a partnership with Snoopy and NASA together. So their Snoopy lesson plans are really age appropriate for your elementary school students. We really see the idea that professional development in general needs to change. I mean, we've all sat at those, the PDs where we're kind of being told what we need to do in our classroom. In reality, we are still stuck in our classrooms. And until we get beyond those four walls and engage our community by bringing in parents who are in certain career fields, by bringing in the community as part of our classroom, then we're going to be stuck in the same situation where we have this type 1 problem. And so obviously, we talked about collaboration earlier. We hope to collaborate with you as well. If you're interested in maybe, if you're of the same mindset, you want to see how maybe our students can work with your students or vice versa, we hope that you'll reach out to us, as we certainly are looking forward to being able to kind of bring aerospace to students around the states. Now, unless you have any questions, I believe we are, my email is here if you'd like to contact us. You can certainly talk to my colleague Kevin Simmons out in the hall. He's your CubeSat guy if you want any questions about that, but we're ready for questions.